it up somehow.
Okay, my Straight Talk family, just in the event you are pondering and wondering what's going on, Straight Talk is live and lively and saying it's time now to bid you a very good night wherever you are in the entire Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, wherever you are in the entire Eastern Caribbean, and of course to my Kittitian and Nevision diaspora, wherever you are around the world. Some of you I know are in Africa, some of you are in Asia, some of you are in Europe, and a whole lot of you are all over North America. So I'm at liberty to say good night. I can say good morning, and I can say good afternoon as well, because one of such greetings is applicable to the region in which you now find yourselves, my Straight Talk family. And just in the event, I've been having quite a lot of questions. We are going to My topic tonight is about change. In fact, the caption is change is unavoidable. And so too, Straight Talk is evolving. And whereas I should say, I prefer to keep that radio feed. And Straight Talk has been with ZIZ Radio for 93 years, and 93 years to be exact. And there lots of changes are anticipated. And my heart goes out in particular to those who do not have access to Wi-Fi, the internet, or smartphone, or smart television, so they can access Straight Talk in or on social media. But nonetheless, we are going to adapt to ensure we include all those who are in that particular category, whereby they don't have access to social media. But nonetheless, I want to tell you that as well that the numbers that you see are numbers right here in the studio of Straight Talk. Straight Talk has its own studio, does its own production, has its own communication lines, and the numbers are 646-829-6672 and or 869-663-6672, and you have the facility as well to access those numbers from wherever you are. As long as you have Wi-Fi and as long as you have the WhatsApp, you can actually WhatsApp these numbers. But for those who are joining me for the first time, Straight Talk is a public service program that facilitates and promotes free expression on all issues of national interest, be they legal, be they environmental, be they technological, social, economic, and or political issues. On Straight Talk, you do have a forum to express yourselves freely. But in the process, we try to raise the level of national consciousness. We try to raise the level of national discourse by alerting our people to their rights and certainly to their obligations. And as I said tonight, my caption, and I invite your participation as well, because we do include your calls. Like I said, we do include your calls, and we do include your emails as well. And we do have a new email address, which is Straight Talk Patches. That's one word: STRAIGHTTALKPATCHES @gmail.com. So we're gonna phase out that other email address, which is zizstraighttalk@gmail.com. We're gonna phase it out, and I'll tell you exactly when we no longer use that email address as well. But like I said, you just tell your friends, especially those innocent kids, you have your smartphones, share it with your neighbors. Share that information with your neighbors. If you have your smart television, you can go onto YouTube and then you enter Straight Talk with Ian Patches Liburd, and you're right on your big screen. And get your neighbors as part of it for those who don't have the access to the smart TV and the smartphones. But as long as you have the internet, you should be able to get Straight Talk, because we are moving away from the radio slowly. But ever since I was a young boy growing up, I have always learned that change is unavoidable, or as many would put it, change is inevitable. We have also learned that the best thing we can do is to plan for it, plan for change. Yes, we need to plan for change. It was ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, whose way of life, whose character, and whose thought exerted a profound influence on Western philosophy. And Socrates said these words, and I quote, he said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. When you master change, you master your life. Think about it. Why would some of us find it so difficult to change while everything around us is continuously evolving and the world is in a continuing state of transformation? We therefore need this understanding if we are going to build our own fundamental principles of life. We must lay the foundation of our personal universe with a self-esteem in the middle that balances our decisions, our actions, our perception of everything in life. But we live in a society in which power is exercised sometimes in an arbitrary way, and our leaders can be portrayed sometimes as autocratic and unloving. So we need to build structure. We need to build structure with distinct and independent existence to ensure protection, keep things working, and hold everyone accountable to follow the rules that are constantly evolving. But there is a universal force that exists called nature that creates tremendous pressure on societies and individuals with different environmental conditions and unexpected natural behaviors. The truth is, we are surrounded by society, and society is surrounded by nature. It is also said that change is the only constant in life. Well, what about political change? Politics is about giving and taking. It's about change, and nothing is constant in politics. It's about adaptability. In our democratic system, no one is indispensable, and that has been demonstrated right here in St. Kitts and Nevis just 10 days ago. Political change occurred when our country's government and leader changed on the 5th of August 2022. I said before, and I will say again, that the people have spoken. But are they prepared to live with the consequences is a question we may ask ourselves tonight. Empirical history would have taught us that not all political change is good. It does not always lead to positive change in a country. But I am prepared to wait and give our new administration a chance to implement the promises that they were made. And one such promise was the fact that we all can agree to disagree.
The road ahead will be long. But I give you my personal guarantee that we will get there. I pledge to you, we as a people will get there together. I also give you my personal guarantee and the guarantee of my team that we will always be honest with you about the challenges we face. I commit to keeping you informed through all available communication channels available to us. I will listen to you. We will listen to you, even when we disagree.
Well, that's our commitment, and we'll hold our leaders to that. We ought to be able to entertain diverse views. Another way of saying, we will listen to you even though we disagree. But there was no disagreement advanced by Straight Talk or the host of Straight Talk. Yet on Thursday last, ZIZ's General Manager, via Galloway, I'm advised, gave instructions to cut the radio feed sent to ZIZ from this production of Straight Talk. So was via Galloway instructed, and if so, instructed by whom? But in time, we will get to the bottom of that. How can we get there together if our national radio station is inaccessible to a citizen who advances a view that may be at variance with the view of the ruling party? It happened in the last administration when some members even put Straight Talk into the motion of no confidence. But it is said that talk is cheap, but whiskey costs money. Yes, I am saying that it takes money to buy whiskey. So unless or until our new leaders demonstrate a vested interest in your future or mine, then we must take whatever they say with a grain of salt. The future, nonetheless, is uncertain. We can all list many uncertainties in our lives at this very moment. With the COVID-19 fallout, we may ask ourselves, and even beyond that, we can all ask, will I have a job next month? What are my kids doing for school? What can I do for my kids for school come next month? Are we on the brink of a food shortage? What about the global climate crisis? What about the post-COVID recession? What about the knock-on effects of inflation? These are many, many questions we can ask ourselves, and we ought to pose those questions loudly and clearly.
We have an enormous task ahead in the past, and to face challenges that tomorrow will bring, which are some of the greatest opportunities in history. A global climate crisis, the ongoing post-COVID recession, and their knock-on effects such as inflation.
And yes, these are real issues, my Straight Talk family. Change, I know, is hard for many of us as a people to accept. But in reality, we must accept that life is constantly changing. We might lose our jobs. We might lose loved ones, have to relocate unexpectedly, or have other life-changing things happen to us. But these changes are just part of life. Who would have believed that the leader of the People's Action Movement and the leader of the Concerned Citizens Movement would have collapsed the government 3 years before the end of its term? But change is unavoidable. That's what we say. And the people have spoken clearly and loudly, my Straight Talk family. The people have spoken.
Your choice was clear, and your voice was loud. For a better economy and jobs, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. For better health care, housing, and social protection, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. For better education, sports, and entertainment, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. For a better environment and food security, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. For better government and governance, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. We campaigned on that platform. You listened. You examined us. You voted for us. We are ready to deliver on our promises. We are your humble and willing servants.
Yes, my Straight Talk family. But even though the election is now behind us, the analysis will still continue.
The August 5th general elections are now behind us. Yes, analysis of results will continue. However, it is time for your government to get to work. There's much to be done to repair and restore our beloved federation. During my inaugural address on August 6, I gave the assurance that mine will be an office of service. The same ethos will apply to the newly sworn-in cabinet. Believe me when I tell you that the cabinet selection process was done carefully and systematically. Governance is serious business. Your government must be responsive, effective, and efficient.
Yes, my straight dog family, I do concur that governance is serious business. The election is now behind us, but the analysis of the results must continue. We will agree that the issue of fair share for Nevis led to the election. The Charles Crown Accord was anti-Labour because the Labour Party, it was said that the Labour Party bounced the check from the Nevis Island administration. The People's Action Movement advocated a fair share of the CBI proceeds for Nevis. The PLP, on the other hand, enunciated a clear federal policy towards Nevis. The PLP promised to institutionalize constitutional provisions for revenue and expenditure sharing as per section 110 of the Constitution. And it sought recommendations and expected to get World Bank consultancy that would guide the federal government in this regard. And that is still before, believe it or not, that is still before the current administration, my family, as it relates to revenue sharing.
The Constitution has a provision for tax. Crux of the matter. So you are saying essentially that legislation would have to be put in place to determine an agreeable ratio of sharing revenue.
Yes, we sit down, we agree to something, and we put the legislation in place and make sure that people come out of it feeling comfortable about St. Kitts and Nevis, so that there is no discrepancy. And I'm willing to do that.
My straight talk family, I am somewhat at variance though with that particular position, because revenue sharing already exists in the Constitution. There is no legislation required for revenue sharing because that legislation already exists. It is stipulated within our supreme law called the Constitution. And as I said before, government is continuous, and the World Bank was already requested by the former administration to provide advice to the federal government. Prime Minister Drew must therefore tell the country what is the current disposition with the World Bank consultancy that was already requested. And as I said, legislation already exists because the supreme law, as per section 110, deals with revenue allocation. And it bears repeating because some people just don't seem to want to accept it, that the Constitution states that subject to subsection 2, the proceeds of all taxes collected in St. Christopher and Nevis under any law shall be shared between the government and the administration, and the share of each shall be determined by reference to the proportion between the population of the island of St. Christopher and the population of the island of St. Christopher and Nevis as a whole, or as the case may be, the population of the island of Nevis and the population of St. Christopher and Nevis as a whole, as ascertained by reference to the latest available results of a census of those populations carried out in the pursuance of a law enacted by Parliament. So there's no need for legislation, and there's no need to mix up this tax revenue and non-tax revenue and issues like that, because I have with me the estimates for 2022, our current fiscal year, and under revenue there is a recurrent revenue, a total revenue and grants some $913,572,857 estimated for fiscal year 2022, the current fiscal year. And it's broken down in terms of tax revenue, income tax, withholding tax, housing and social development, unincorporated business tax, and the list goes on, tax on property, house tax, condominium tax, and the list goes on. And you can't forget value-added tax, VAT, wheel tax, and so on. And under non-tax revenue, it speaks to fines, rent of government property, water services, the post office, and the post citizenship by investment is one such line item under non-tax revenue. So while taxation is a primary source of income for the government, it also earns some recurring income other than tax, which is called non-tax revenue. But it is revenue. Non-tax revenue is recurring income earned by the government from sources other than taxes. But it's revenue. The most important receipts under this head, as we said, it's CBI receipts. And the estimates for 2022 is $400 million under citizenship by investment. The actuals for 2020 was $270 million, $807,661. And by the end of this year, we'll get the actuals for 2021. And the estimates for 2021, the projections rather was some $500 million. But things change, my people. Things change, people change. Change is one of the inevitable laws of nature, exacting its toll on people's lives at times. Mistakes were made, regrets formed, and repercussions from the reality of going back onto the opposition benches is forcing some people to change. Would you believe that the reality of going back onto the opposition benches has forced Sean Richards and forced him to entertain the view that he wants to abandon his own People's Action Movement? Do you believe that, my Straight Talk family? This is what came to Straight Talk just a few days ago, my family. Things change.
The People's Action Movement, Sean Richards, there are rumblings that he may want to consider an alliance with the government. What do you make of that? Would Dr. Drew be seriously off his judgment if he would even listen to a conversation like that, given the role that Sean Richards played in the collapse?
It certainly would not. It certainly would not have my support, because and I don't think Dr. Drew would attempt such without asking an opinion. I'm not sure what realistically Mr. Richards would bring to the table at this point. I'm not sure that aligning with an individual and an organization that for 45 or so years you have persuaded and you have contended was not worthy of public consideration. I'm not seeing wisdom at this time in seeking an unholy alliance if it is not absolutely necessary.
Did we get that, my Stray Dog family? Do you believe that Sean Richards is seeking an alliance with the Labour Party? Do you believe that? Labour does not need Sean. Is he in his right mind? But people change. And as I said, change is one of the inevitable laws, one of the unavoidable laws of nature. And it exacts toll or a toll on people's lives. And Sean Richards cannot fathom, he cannot come to the grips to the fact that he collapsed a government that he could have been still in for the next 3 years. And he's now faced with the reality that he has to sit on the opposition benches. So he has approached, we are told, the Labour government and tried to form an alliance. Do you believe that? Form an alliance with Dr. Joe to be part of his government. I want you to hear this again, my Stray Dog family.
Now, there are rumblings that he may want to consider an alliance with the government. What do you make of that? Would Dr. Drew be seriously off his judgment if he would even listen to a conversation like that, given the role that Sean Richards played in the collapse?
It certainly would not. It certainly would not have my support, because and I don't think Dr. Drew would attempt such without asking an opinion. I'm not sure what realistically Mr. Richards would bring to the table at this point. I'm not sure that aligning with an individual and an organization that for 45 or so years you have persuaded and you have contended was not worthy of public consideration. I'm not seeing wisdom at this time in seeking an unholy alliance if it is not absolutely necessary.
Seeking an unholy alliance with a man who collapsed the government. Interestingly enough, though, my Stray Dog family, President Maduro is one of the leaders that reached out to congratulate Prime Minister Joe. President Maduro, we are told, reached out to congratulate and spoke, in fact, with Prime Minister Joe.
On Tuesday, Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro, Prime Minister-elect Terence Drew. On his official Twitter account, the Venezuelan president wrote, "I had a fun conversation with Dr. Terence Drew, the Prime Minister-elect of St. Kitts and Nevis, to whom I express my congratulations for his victory last August 5th. Venezuela reiterates its commitment to strengthen friendly relations with the peoples of the Caribbean."
Very interesting development. The president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reaching out to Prime Minister Terence Drew. And this must have provided an opening to restore, to resuscitate the Petro-Carib Agreement, which Sean Richards discarded. Sean Richards unilaterally discarded the Petro-Carib Agreement in preference with a deal with his friend at Delta. The Petro-Carib Agreement is not just about trading in oil or fuel, because the Petro-Carib Agreement which was entered into under the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party some 12 or 14 years ago. I've stand to be corrected, about 12 years ago, I think it was. It's not just about trading in fuel or in trading in oil, because it has a very important social component to that agreement. And St. Kitts and Nevis have benefited tremendously from that agreement. The social component would speak to development of the houses, our Wellington Road housing project, for example, that was grant funded at a cost of 50%. As a matter of fact, it should have been fully grant funded, but when the government of Venezuela found out that those that the houses are being allocated to would have to pay a mortgage, then they had to change the arrangement and 50% grant funded. Because in Venezuela it was anticipated that these houses would be given free. Now, St. Kitts and Nevis owes a debt of gratitude to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Skelec alone owes Venezuela some US $17 million for fuel it procured and has not paid for that fuel. So Prime Minister Drew must rip to pieces. He must get that agreement signed by Skelec at the behest of the then Minister of Public Infrastructure and Utilities, Sean Richards. Prime Minister Drew must get that agreement and rip it to pieces, because that agreement is an illegitimate oil procurement deal with Delta, and he must rip it to pieces and in the process try to normalize relations with our friends in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Prime Minister Drew and Labour do not need Sean Richards. Instead, he has rightly concentrated on his campaign promises. He has concentrated rightly on his campaign promises, like lifting the travel restrictions.
I have indicated that there be no more restrictions for our people to travel to St. Kitts and Nevis. I have indicated a waiver until we would have sorted out all of the necessary channels. So there's a waiver now. So at this present moment, our people can travel to St. Kitts and Nevis without any restrictions at all. They don't need to do any test, and they're given the option to upload their information, which will make processing at the airport much easier for them. And all of this is based on sound scientific advice. I would have met with the task force, we would have gone through the scientific data, and therefore I want to announce that based on that, their advice in discussions, that there is no scientific basis to continue the restrictions, and therefore they are lifted. And I'm sure that our people will be happy for that.
Well, I can't talk for people, but I can talk for me. And I am happy for that these travel restrictions are being lifted. I'm also happy to learn that equipment is being procured for the JN France hospital. Because I remember back then, like 10 or 12, more than that, about 12 or more years ago, when the then Minister of Health, Asim Martin, and I spoke. I remember I had a son that we had to airlift to San Juan, Puerto Rico, back in 2007, I think it was. That's now 15 years ago. And back then, the MRI existed in San Juan hospitals. And I suggested to Asim Martin, back then the then Minister of Health, that we have to get advanced. We have to advance our hospital in terms of procurement of equipment. Imagine you had to go to Antigua for a CAT scan. And technology has, medical health technology has advanced to the MRI. So this also is welcome, that news that an MRI machine will be installed at the JN France hospital sooner rather than later.
We had promised the MRI as well, and we should have the MRI in short order. I've already received the information from the hospital as to the type of MRI and so forth, and so we'll move quickly, and the MRI should be up and running. And I've indicated to them that the cost has to be as low as possible, and nobody will be turned back because they lack the financial resources to get an MRI done. MRI has now become a mainstay in medical practice, and as a high-income modern country, we should have that available and available at our hospital, and that will be available in quick order as well. So I want our people to know that that has been done also.
And that has, as I said, has to be good news, irrespective of what we think about the incoming government. Some more good news came from Prime Minister Drew as it relates to the Clarence Fitzroy Bryant College. Free tuition? Isn't that an interesting development?
I also want to reiterate that our CFBC will be a free institution for our people and for nationals, for our citizens, and for the non-nationals who are here, their children especially who grew up here, who attend CFBC, their children, fathers and mothers, our parents and guardians who are paying social security and social levy, they will benefit from our policy at the CFBC as well.
That, my Straight Dog family, has to be welcome news. And one other promise we are told has been implemented is a specialized fund for children whose parents cannot afford to absorb the costs of their medical travel overseas. We see so many people with sheets going around begging, and begging arouses scorn. So this has to be a very good gesture as well, my Straight Dog family.
I also want to say that in discussion creating that fund for children who need specialized care outside of the Federation, who don't have insurance, whose parents can't afford it, that their medical bills be paid. So no longer would any child have to die because the parents don't have money.
Again, one of the 4 campaign promises we are told being expeditiously implemented by the Terence Drew administration. And all this resulted from the political change ushered in by the people. And former Prime Minister Harris, I may add quickly, has nothing to be ashamed about. He has nothing to be ashamed of, because he had his opportunity and he performed well. Harris has nothing to be ashamed of, as even his adversaries consider him to be an astute politician.
I think that Dr. Harris may have captured at the point at which he fired his colleagues and dissolved the parliament. I think that that was a very astute political move. I admired it, and I thought at the time he was going to be problematic for us. He then immediately followed up about 3-4 days later with a very, very attractive package of measures which address all sectors of the country, and particularly you would recall that this in the throes of COVID and with the closing of the winter season, there was some emergent hardships in the country. There were persons who were beginning to be laid off. You had escalating fuel prices. You have the whole question of the global food supply. You have the issues of many of the migrants who were persons who had come to St. Kitts and who were not finding employment. And his policies, as enunciated within 84 hours of the dissolution of Parliament, I felt hit the nail on the head. So at that point, I felt he was threatening, because he was doing the right things. He was showing that he had the strength of character, the will, the courage to do a few things. And I felt at that time he was a particular threat to us, especially if he had gone presidential. Because if you are doing the right things as the leader, then my view, strategically at that time, if I had an opportunity to whisper into his ear, I would have told him to go presidential and not to seek to delay the process by perfecting a team.
Did you hear that, my Straight Talk family? Did Harris have the wrong advisors? That's Hartley Henry. Hartley Henry suggested if he had to whisper in Harris's ear, he would have told him to go presidential. They dissolved the House in 21 days. It took some astute, or made some astute political moves. So call the elections, go presidential, and take your people along with you. But just like change is unavoidable, so too no man is infallible. Thus to err is human. And in hindsight, it is believed that Harris made some fundamental errors that cost him the elections and, so to speak, resurrected the Labour Party.
There's still no team that you can go around and find and be ready seriously for an election within 60 days. So I felt that he made a fundamental error in terms of dragging the process out. I think having given, quote unquote, all of his goodies up front, the next 75 or so days, the average person knew that the economy was not in the strongest shape. You're not seeing any tourist visitors arriving. St. Kitts and Nevis still have some of the most punitive measures in terms of COVID, whereby you still have, at that time it was still tests required. You still have to get permission from the Ministry of Health to enter the country. Just hanging around to ready your team, I think, was a fundamental error, because we knew that PLP had captured the imagination of the public. But I think with the passage of time, that too passed, and we were able then to sustain the lead that we had and hold on to it. Still no team that you can go around and find and have assembled and be ready seriously for an election within 60 days. So I felt that he made a fundamental error in terms of dragging the process out. I think having given, quote unquote, all of his goodies up front, the next 75 or so days, the average person knew that the economy was not in the strongest shape. You're not seeing any tourist visitors arriving. St. Kitts and Nevis still have some of the most punitive measures in terms of COVID, whereby you still have, at that time it was still tests required. You still have to get permission from the Ministry of Health to enter the country. Just hanging around to ready your team, I think, was a fundamental error, because we knew that PLP had captured the imagination of the public. But I think with the passage of time, that too passed, and we were able then to sustain the lead that we had and hold on to it.
We, meaning the Labour Party, a fundamental error to hang around so long. But that, my friends, is now history, because the people have spoken, and they said that they are not going back to any alliance. They are not going back to any coalition, lest they run the risk of another collapse. So they stood rather, with what they have today, the Terence Drew Labour administration.
Two of the things we learned from our analysis: persons were not minded to go the route of a coalition, of an alliance, of groupings again, because their experience from this last one were not the best. And obviously, if a team unity or a unity government fails, then what else can work? Because the very essence of the collaboration of those three parties were that they could have unified and brought some stability to the country.
Not going back with any coalition or any alliance. The experience of the August the 5th election is therefore a confirmation that change is unavoidable. That's my story tonight, my Straight Dog family, and I'm not going to change it. I'm not certain if I got across the point, though I would like to open the lines. But if you're so minded to call, I want you to take note that the numbers are 646-829-6672 or 869-663-6672. Our email for now, which we will change shortly, like I said, zizstraighttalk@gmail.com. And this email reads: I just heard you said you will no longer be on ZIZ. Do you plan on looking at other radio outlets? The options are there, my Straight Dog family. Yes, we look at other options, but still we won't surrender in terms of the use of ZIZ radio, because ZIZ radio and Straight Talk have entered into a contract way back in November of 2019. ZIZ, over the years, we've had a very good relationship, and there's no justification whatsoever to move on either party, ZIZ or Straight Talk. I can say to you, you've heard some things that are fake news. I can say to you that ZIZ tried to change the contract unceremoniously and tried to increase it by 500% or more, when in fact they were providing less services, in that Straight Talk does its own production and it has its own telephone lines, and all Straight Talk is asking for is a feed from a radio feed that is from ZIZ. But we won't surrender. As I said, we will look at it and look at it closely and see how we can resolve this matter, my Straight Dog family. And this email reads, good evening, Ambassador. I could not go to sleep after your program, and I wanted to compliment you on a superb program last Thursday night. There are more questions than answers. Personally, the overseas voters played an integral part in the SKNLP's win, but it is what it is, reads this email. PLP has to do some serious thinking of the way forward, and who will have the intestinal fortitude to stand with Dr. Harris. I guess some of them might have lost their jobs. Dr. Harris was the sacrificial lamb. He tried his utmost, but the odds were against him. He lost ground in his own constituency because he had to train and recruit his new candidates. I call this a vex election. The bottom line is that the people were upset with team unity, as you mentioned, and they punished PAM and PLP. Beg your pardon. Don't bother with ZIZ. That's to be expected. We will follow you wherever you go. You might even have to change the email address. The divisions like it so. The pariah Mark Brantley will suck the nipples of the federal government for as long as he can. Nevis doesn't seem to understand that they have a responsibility to generate their revenue. I listened to PM Drew's first interview, and when he was asked about finances, he said that he checked and finances were sound. I will listen with bated breath to the goings-on. Swearing of ministers on Saturday was an interesting one. I have my eyes on Dr. Douglas. He still thinks that he's PM. By the way, do you remember any former prime minister anywhere being given a ministerial post? I hope that you've taken care of your business overseas and things are in order. There will be lots of witch hunting under the guise of the truth. Say bless. Looking forward to hearing you on Monday. And that email came in after my program last week, Thursday. And I want to thank that emailer for the kind compliments. But at the expense of time, many things will be revealed. But those guys resurrected labor, and now we will all have to pay the price. We must find comfort in knowing, however, that God is the absolute judge who sets up one and puts down another. Let's therefore continue to trust in the Lord. And my family, I know that as I said, my radio feed is not with me, so I've lost that population in terms of those who just have a transistor radio all around the country, in Newton Ground, those in Nevis, those elsewhere within the Federation. But we will sort that out. I'm gonna encourage you to get your smartphones, get your data on your phones, and get into the information technology category that can keep you abreast with everything that's happening even on social media. But my family, in the event you have just joined me, if you have just joined me, I welcome you to this edition of Straight Talk. If you have just joined me or you're joining me for the first time, Straight Talk is a public service program that facilitates and promotes free expression on all issues of national interest, be they legal, be they environmental, be they technological, social, economic, and or political issues. On Straight Talk, you do have a forum to express yourselves freely. Remember that what we try to do is to raise the level of national consciousness. We try to raise the level of national discourse by alerting our people to their rights, to their responsibilities, and to their obligations. As of next program, we are going to move into the issues as it relates to water, as it relates to electricity, as it relates to climate change, and what I call climate variability, and housing, and all the other issues that will impact our people. We have to keep focus on the way forward. The people have spoken, and in our democracy, we accept what the majority have said. One thing we know is that change is unavoidable. Who would have imagined that after the 2020 elections, who would have imagined that we'd have a snap elections 2 years after? I'm sure none of us anticipated that. I'm sure as well, even the party now in office didn't expect that. But God smiled on them. They did the right things, and they emerged in the lead at the right time. But as I said before, ever since I was a young boy, I learned that change is unavoidable. As it is said, I learned that change is inevitable, and change will come. We have also learned that the best thing that we can do is just to plan for change. We just have to plan for it. I mentioned earlier that Greek philosopher Socrates, whose way of life, whose character and thought exerted a profound influence on Western philosophy. Socrates is credited with this or these words, and I quote, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. When you master change, you master your life." So think about it. Why would some of us find it so difficult to change while everything around us is continuously evolving? And the world is in a continuing state of transformation. We therefore need to understand, if we are going to build our own fundamental principles of life. My Straight Dog family, as we move into this season, the post-COVID season, our world is threatened. The war in Ukraine is still raging. Inflation will affect us. Oil prices continue to escalate. And in our case in St. Kitts and Nevis, we have to find alternative sources of energy. We spoke to renewable energy, water as well. And I saw the Premier claiming credit for some desalination plant. I don't know why he would do that, because as Minister of Public Infrastructure, I was the one who signed that agreement with the UAE, with the then Minister of Public Infrastructure of the UAE. I don't think it was called infrastructure, but public works, I think it was called. I remember that flight came in about 9 o'clock one night, and we signed that agreement in my office then at Nevis. But what happened? Because foreign affairs is like the post box for all communications to government or with the government. Everything goes through foreign affairs via diplomatic note. And it was captured at that ministry. And the then Minister of Foreign Affairs and Premier sought to send that application from the NIA. And it was returned. We found out it was returned because the NIA has no local standard, has no capacity as it relates to matters of a government to government, because the government is in fact the St. Kitts Nevis government and not the Nevis Island administration. So it came back to my attention, and what we did, in fact, instead of taking or revising or withdrawing, rescinding that request from Nevis, we added another desalination plant. And that was since about 2018. Why on earth it took so long to implement that project? God knows what happens in Nevis. I know in St. Kitts we had identified over there in Connery. Then we learned over there in Canada, beg your pardon. Then we learned it was the site for the range that the Defense Force uses. We went further on to Keys. Then we found that it was an area where the turtle watch or the turtle nest would be interrupted. Turtle nesting would be interrupted. So then we went on to Kean, just outside of Keys. So why someone is claiming that, I don't know. But that's what happens when you find some politicians what they are. You know what I mean. But my Straight Talk family, I want to suggest again that as a government, and government is continuous, we have to look at alternative energy or renewable energy. We have to look at desalination. And next week, on Monday, we will look at water, as water is life. And what is happening in St. Kitts as it relates to water? A friend of mine called me 2 Sundays ago. My good friend called me, and he said that an arrangement or an agreement has been signed with BEAD. Yes, I confirm that that agreement was signed with BEAD. I also reminded him that before Team Unity came into office in 2015, BEAD had signed an agreement just before elections in January of 2015. And for years, they never delivered one drop of water until Ocean Earth Technology came. Ocean Earth Technology came to St. Kitts as part of the Bastia Valley project, the Bastia Valley Protection Project, or Protection of the Aquifer, I think it was called back then. And they did a wonderful job. And they had recommended that the well field be relocated north or northwards to the airport because of climate change, which has derived rising sea levels. It also brought with it salt intrusion. So in the well field, we had salt intrusion, and that was identified in 2007, some 15 years ago. And absolutely nothing was done about it. But some of the time, we'll also talk about that. But going forward, I recommend we're going to look at water as well as alternative energy. And my Straight Talk family, going forward as well, I said to my friend when he called me about BEAD going to drill in Kean, and I said to him, they will not find one drop of water in Kean, no matter how much they drill. They would not find one drop of potable water in Kean. And you wonder, you ask yourselves, what is the rationale between going, and that contract was signed since 2020, signed by under the auspices of the then minister with responsibility for water, Sean Richards, since December 2020. nigh 2 years ago. Why has been not delivered that well now going on for 2 years? I've heard that they just found, or they're bringing some engine for their real drig. Is that the right term? Drill rig, my straight dog family. And it amuses me, it baffles me, it bemuses me as well. Because we are not facing the facts. And perhaps it's a good thing we have change, you know. And I really would like the incumbent administration to look into a lot of these matters. Don't go on no witch hunt as you promise. Look into a lot of these matters. You can look into the second cruise pier. You ought to, and get rid of the nonsense you're hearing. You can look at the Island Main Road project and also clarify the matters and false news that's being peddled. And of course, look into as well the Old Road Bay project. Because when I left in 2020, that project was 98% complete or completed. What has happened to it? We have the lights gone. We have them gone. So don't go on a witch hunt, but look into these things. Examine the traffic lights. Whatever project you want to examine, you should examine them and examine them from a professional perspective. Don't go on a witch hunt. But I want you to guide you, really. I want you really and seriously to look at the Old Road Bay project and establish why those lights have not been mounted on the Old Road Bay project. And it's a safety issue. A safety issue. And look at that condominium project and find out if those lights are the same lights that should have been at Old Road Bay. So I want you, yes, don't go on a witch hunt. Please don't. But you can investigate, analyze, look at all these projects, my people. From the Island Main Road, the second cruise pier, the East Bastion Terminal, the West Bastion Terminal, the terminal at the ferry terminal. Look at all of them. Ask yourselves as well, why has not those lights, traffic signals at Bird Rock, why have they not been operationalized? Why? Is it to accommodate Kentucky Fried Driving? Why? Ask yourselves a question. Why that mess up all of a sudden? And we need to investigate all these things by Straight Dog family. You need to investigate them and tell us. Tell us, Prime Minister, you said you're going to communicate with us. So I want you to communicate on all these issues, all these projects. I invite you to do it, because I myself would like to find out a lot of issues that need clarifying in my own mind as a former minister with public infrastructure. It's 9:14, my Straight Dog family. And in the event you have just joined me, we are discussing change. And our caption tonight is change is unavoidable. I suggest that as we go forward, we ask ourselves, why would some of us find it so difficult to change? Why? Why would some of us find it so difficult to change while everything around us is continuously evolving, while the entire world is in a continuing state of transformation? We therefore need to understand, or we need this understanding, if we are going to build our own fundamental principles of life. We must lay the foundation for our personal universe with a self-esteem, a self-value in the center of all of this that creates a balance and helps us to balance our decisions, I should say, our actions and perception of everything in our lives. But we live in a society in which power is sometimes exercised in a very arbitrary way. And our leaders can sometimes be portrayed as being autocratic and unloving. And I want to suggest that we be guided and we need to build structure. We need to build a structure with distinct and independent existence to ensure protection of our people, to ensure that everyone is held accountable and follows the rules of good governance and follows all the rules that are constantly evolving. But there is a universal force that exists called nature, that creates tremendous pressure on societies and on individuals. They present different environmental conditions and unexpected behavior in our people. The truth is, we are surrounded by society, and society is surrounded by nature. It is also said that change is the only constant in life. But what about political change? Politics is about giving and taking. It is about change. But nothing in politics is constant. It is about adaptability. In our democratic system, no one is indispensable. And that has been demonstrated here in St. Kitts and Nevis just 10 days ago. 10 days to be exact. And when we saw what happened, when we saw how some people were vilified, these same people were the same people who really brought this country back from the brink of economic disaster. We had a prime minister who took us from the clutches of the IMF. Was our state, our nation was drowning in debt. Just like over there in Nevis, where we have a leader who just cannot manage. But yet, the best thing that happened to us, I can say, is that that leader, or those two leaders who were part of our coalition, the best thing that has happened to us in our country is that PAM and CCM are not part of this government. When you look at PAM, and when you heard this about Sean, it's hard to believe that he, after doing what he has done, has tried to find or form an alliance with Labour.
He wants it. Now, there are rumblings that he may want to consider an alliance with the government. What do you make of that? Would Dr. Drew be seriously of his judgment if he would even listen to a conversation like that, given the role that John Richards played in the collapse?
It certainly would not. It certainly would not have my support, because and I don't think Dr. Drew would attempt such without asking an opinion. I'm not sure what realistically Mr. Richards would bring to the table at this point. I'm not sure that aligning with an individual and an organization that for 45 or so years you have persuaded and you have contended was not worthy of public consideration. I'm not seeing the wisdom at this time in seeking an unholy alliance if it is not absolutely necessary.
What wisdom could there be in seeking, to quote Hartley Henry, an unholy alliance with Sean Richards? Why would Sean Richards want to abandon PAM and join with Labour, having done what he did? But my people, I implore you, I am prepared to wait and give our new administration a chance. I implore you to do the same. Give them a chance to implement the promises that were made. Do not get too hasty, my people. Give them a chance to implement their promises, like this one.
It will be steep, but I give you my personal guarantee that we will get there. I pledge to you, we as a people will get there together. I also give you my personal guarantee and the guarantee of my team that we will always be honest with you about the challenges we face. I commit to keeping you informed through all available communication channels available to us. I will listen to you. We will listen to you, even when we disagree.
I'm going to hold you to that, Prime Minister. I'm not saying that we will disagree, but we are different people, so at times our views will be at variance. But I'm sure we will agree that the future is uncertain. And we can list many uncertainties in our own lives and in the lives of many of our people. Will I have a job next month? Next month come September, will I be able to send my kids to school with their books and their new uniforms? With what's happening in the world today, in Europe, the food basket, in Ukraine, I should say, is what's happening there? We are uncertain. Are we on the brink of food shortages? When are we going to get self-sufficient in our own food development and food crop development, agriculture, and our marine resources? What about the global climate crisis? The globe is getting warmer and warmer. In some parts of the world, because of the glacial melting, some islands like in Tuvalu and elsewhere are losing land because of the sea level rising. We ourselves experience the fallout of sea level rises. I recall even there down that old road bay, when we thought that the road was sinking, in fact, the sea level was rising. It continues to rise. That's why we had to build resilience down there in Old Road Bay. We still have to build resilience along our coast. We need revetment. But the Old Road Bay project was a mastermind, a genius. And we don't have to worry no more about the rock fall from the mountainside. Neither shall we worry about the sea level rise and the bad weather, the 200-year cycle storm that hit our country today. No longer we have to worry about them. So the issue of the global climate is something that impacts us negatively as well. And we have to build resilience in certain areas to combat this global climate crisis. What about the post-COVID recession that we hear so much about? Inflation, the knock-on effect of inflation. This global crisis has to be addressed, my people. How are we going to address it? These are pertinent questions that we need to ask ourselves, and our leaders have to address. But we're going to give them time. Time to settle down, time to understand government, and time to really put their acts together, my Straight Dog family. But the global climate crisis is something serious.
In the past, and to face challenges that tomorrow will bring, which are some of the greatest opportunities in history. A global climate crisis, the ongoing post-COVID recession, and their knock-on effects such as inflation.
Yes, my Straight Dog family, these are issues that have to be addressed. But I know change is hard for many of us as a people to accept. But in reality, we must accept that life is constantly changing. We might lose our jobs, as I said. In life, we lose loved ones. And I must extend my sympathy to my own family, my dear niece Dana, and Michelle, and the entire family, Rochester family, the passing of Ina Samuels and Monty Samuel. I understand that they'll be interred on Thursday. Fortunately, I'm not available at that time. And just crossing my mind is my brother Rob. I hope he is or has recovered from whatever was his illness. And all those who have lost loved ones, I do convey sincere condolences. But yes, we might lose loved ones. We might have to relocate unexpectedly or have other life-changing things happen to us. But these changes we'll have to accept as being part of life. My family, even though the election is behind us, we will still do our analysis. But as I said, I implore you to give them a chance.
For a better economy and jobs, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. For better health care, housing and social protection, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. For better education, sports and entertainment, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. For better environment and food security, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. For better government and governance, you chose the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. We campaigned on that platform. You listened. You examined us. You voted for us. We are ready to deliver on our promises. We are your humble and willing servants.
And yes, my Stray Dog family, even though the election is now behind us, the analysis will continue. We are looking for good governance, and governance demands an efficient and effective government, my people. We will find that, I am sure, at times after we analyze the performance.
It will be steep, but I give you my personal guarantee that we will get there. I pledge to you, we as a people will get there together. I also give you my personal guarantee and the guarantee of my team that we will always be honest with you about the challenges we face. I commit to keeping you informed through all available communication channels available to us. I will listen to you. We will listen to you, even when we disagree.
Constitution has a provision for tax revenue. The CBI revenues, however, that's where the crux of the matter is. So you are saying essentially that legislation would have to be put in place to determine an agreeable ratio of sharing revenue.
Yes, we sit down, we agree to something, and we put the legislation in place and make sure that people come out of it feeling comfortable about St. Kitts and Nevis, so that there is no discrepancy. And I'm willing to do that.
I'm laboring this point, or it may seem that way, but this fair share is determined by the Constitution. There's no need for legislation, Prime Minister, and I say so respectfully, because legislation already exists. Legislation exists. As I mentioned earlier, the World Bank was approached and was requested by the former administration to provide advice to the federal government, and government is continuous. Let us hear what the World Bank consultancy that was already requested, what did they say? There is no need to worry about fair share and what proportion, because the Constitution speaks to that. We just have to determine what percentage which is based on the population. It says that, beg your pardon, and I read it before and I'll read it again, because this I know will be a sticking point, because the Premier of Nevis has a really, an argument, a rationale that borders on absurdity. And we must not be fooled by him, because the Constitution is very clear. Section 110 which speaks to revenue allocation, is pellucid and reads subsection 1, subject to subsection 2, the proceeds of all taxes collected in St. Christopher and Nevis under any law shall be shared between the government and the administration, and the share of each shall be determined by reference to the proportion between the population of the island of St. Christopher and the population of St. Christopher and Nevis as a whole, or as the case may be, the population of the island of Nevis and the population of St. Christopher and Nevis as a whole, as ascertained by the reference to the latest available results of a census of those populations carried out in pursuance of a law enacted by Parliament. And I know there was a census, or there was an ongoing census. I must find out if it was completed, so we can get the latest information from that. But subsection 2, or section 2 reads, subsection 2, the share of the administration under subsection 1 shall be subject to the following deductions. And herein lies the issue, because they don't want to submit themselves or commit themselves in Nevis to this. A contribution to the cost of common services provided for St. Christopher and Nevis by the government. And B, a contribution to the cost of meeting the debt charges which the government is responsible under section 75. And it goes on. The government, or the Governor General, beg your pardon, may make rules for the purpose of giving effect to the provisions of this section, and without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing power, any such rules may make provision A for prescribing what services are to be regarded as common services. That's what we have to negotiate, Prime Minister Joe. You have to agree that what make provisions for prescribing what services rather are to be regarded as common services. And that's easy. For determining the contributions to be made by the administration in relation to any common service so prescribed. And C, for determining the contributions to be made by the administration in respect of the debt charges for this government, for which the government, beg your pardon, is responsible, and for prescribing the time at which and manner in which calculations and payments, including provisional payments, are to be made. So this argument about tax revenue and non-tax revenue is baloney. Revenue is revenue. They are all, as I said before, economic classifications. That's all they are. Taxation is a primary source of income for the government. It also earns some recurring income other than tax, which is called non-tax revenue. And non-tax revenue is the recurring income earned by government from sources other than taxes. But it's income. Tax revenue or non-tax revenue is income. It's economic classification. Do not be fooled. Do not be fooled. There needs nothing. We're going to be guided by the Constitution. And yes, the CBI receipts are the most important receipts under this head of non-tax revenue. But we're not going to be browbeated because someone do not manage their treasury well. I must repeat, when you look at a budget, and any leader who would project recurrent expenditure of $229 million. $229 million. And project revenue of $131 million is not worthy to be looking over the treasury. A $98 million deficit, looking for an augmentation of some $45 million, now moved to $66 million. You still have a deficit, I should say, of $32 million. That's not good management. That can't be. Cannot be. The dance can't pay for the lights. So something has to be wrong with your budgeting. And you have to raise revenue. You can't depend on a handout. Give him a hand up, Prime Minister Joe. Don't give him no handouts. He must learn to manage his budget. But things change. People change. Change is one of the inevitable laws of nature. And it exacts its toll on people's lives. And as I mentioned, as we wind down tonight's programming, I was happy as well when I learned that the president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela touched base with Prime Minister Drew.
Nevis Prime Minister-elect Terence Drew. On his official Twitter account, the Venezuelan president wrote, "I had a fun conversation with Dr. Terence Drew, the Prime Minister-elect of St. Kitts and Nevis, to whom I express my congratulations for his victory last August 5th. Venezuela reiterates its commitment to strengthen friendly relations with the peoples of the Caribbean."
That to me is good news. And this conversation with or between our Prime Minister Terence Drew and President Maduro must be a welcome one. It must have opened the door to find resolution to our fuel import issues that we have. We are under Sean Richards, Skelec moved from the Petro-Carib agreement, an illegitimate move, I may add, and move to his friend at Delta. I understand they could not even pay the Delta bill and still owe Delta. And it's important when these investigations, and hopefully not witch hunts, are launched, we will find out, and I trust, as promised, the Prime Minister will report as often as possible to the country the findings of these investigations. Because Skelec had a $31 million reserve, and that seemed to have been poofed away. Skelec, we are told, installed 2 light poles at the Sandy Point Recreation or the Sandy Point Playfield, costing some $1 million. Over at Keon, there were 6 poles mounted with the best lights within St. Kitts and Nevis, And that costed $1.6 million for 6 poles. And two cars, $1 million. You do the mathematics, my straight dog family. I can't. Mathematics over the years have been my strongest weak point. But something just does not seem to add up when it comes to that. And why would Skellig have to put lighting down at Sandy Point? Skellig, we understand as well, entered into an arrangement and put poles into a private development. How could Skellig put 25 poles up into a private development and forsake the Old Road Bay project? I want as well, Mr. Prime Minister, for you to tell the country whether Magnolia residences and condominiums, I want you to tell the country after your investigation how much money they paid to Skellig and how was Skellig paid. These are questions we need answers for. And going back to the Petro-Caribbean agreement, it is not just about trading in oil. It has a very important component or social component. Remember the severance payment of $60 million? That came as a result of that agreement from the joint venture company. St. Kitts owes not only a debt of gratitude to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, it also owes money to that country. And I am imploring the Prime Minister and the Cabinet to bring forward that agreement between the friend of the former minister with responsibility for Skellig and his oil company. Look at that agreement, scrutinize it, and tell the country if it was done in keeping with the procurement legislation. Look at it. Examine them and tell us what benefits were derived for Skellig and by extension for the government and or for anyone. These are issues. And I guarantee if there is a written agreement, the Cabinet would suggest that we rip it to pieces because it has to be illegitimate. It has to be. But we have to go back or get back to that Petro-Caribbean agreement and make it work. Or it worked for lots of years and there's no need to stop it. My family, as we wind down, and as I said before, you cannot entertain the former Deputy Prime Minister in this administration. It has to be crazy. What is he trying to do? Hide something? Misguide you? Prime Minister Drew, you cannot even consider that. They have to stay on the opposition benches. I am happy for that. Make sure they stay there. and answer the questions when they're asked. So, Prime Minister Drew and Labour, you do not need Shaw Richards. Concentrate on your promises to the people. As one who travels frequently, I salute thee and I support this. I support strongly. I myself had my own views, but I had to conform each time. Each time I traveled, as a frequent traveler, I had to conform. But I support this strongly.
That there be no more restrictions for our people to travel in to St. Kitts and Nevis. I've indicated a waiver until we would have sorted out all of the necessary channels. So there's a waiver now. So at this present moment, our people can travel to St. Kitts and Nevis without any restrictions at all. They don't need to do any test, and they're given the option to upload their information, which will make processing at the airport much easier for them. And all of this is based on sound scientific advice. I would have met with the task force, we would have gone through the scientific data, and therefore I want to announce that based on that, their advice in discussions, that there is no scientific basis to continue the restrictions, and therefore they are lifted. And I'm sure that our people will be happy for that.
Yes, our people will be happy, because lots of people complain. I adjusted, even in light of my frequent traveling to and from St. Kitts. But people will be happy. And as I said before, if the former Minister of Health and former representative of East Basti, Asim Martin, would be honest, he was, I believe, Minister of Health from 1995, I think, to about 2005. And I personally approached him about an MRI way back in 2000, I think it was way back in 2001 or thereabout. I stand to be corrected. Because as I mentioned, I had to evacuate my son who was injured. Someone burst his head with a hammer, and I saw him in blood. We took him to Puerto Rico. He went into the emergency room about 9 o'clock that morning and had surgery for about 12 successive hours, just about after 8 that night. But I saw when they took him back then to the MRI center, and I said to Asim, we need to get equipment at the hospital. So to me, it is a welcome sight. It's welcome news, I should say, that our hospital is being upgraded to have modern equipment in that hospital, like the MRI that will be installed, as I understand it. I'm going to call a spade a spade. It is welcome in our hospital, the MRI equipment.
The MRI, and we should have the MRI in short order. I've already received the information from the hospital as to the type of MRI and so forth. And so we'll move quickly. And the MRI should be up and running. And I've indicated to them that the cost has to be as low as possible, and nobody will be turned back because they lack the financial resources to get an MRI done. MRI has now become a mainstay in medical practice, and as a high-income modern country, we should have that available and available at our hospital, and that will be available in quick order as well. So I want our people to know that that has been done also.
Well, we can't fault that. We must commend that. Commend that move very early in the life of this new administration. Come September, as I said earlier, many parents are going to be wondering how they would deal with the cost of school books, of school uniforms, and so on. So this next move must also be a welcome one.
For our people and for nationals, for our citizens, and for the non-nationals who are here, their children especially who grew up here, who attend CFBC, their children, fathers and mothers, our parents and guardians who are paying social security and social levy, they will benefit from our policy at the CFBC as well.
And yes, my Straight Dog family, as well, this other commitment.
I want to say that in discussion with the Financial Secretary, we are now finalizing creating that fund for children who need specialized care outside of the Federation, who don't have insurance, whose parents can't afford it, that their medical bills be paid. So no longer would any child have to die because the parents don't have money.
Isn't that a great gesture? Great social action. And all this resulted, as we wind down my Straight Dog family, from the political change ushered in by the people. And as I said before, I will say again, before I conclude, that former Prime Minister Timothy Sylvester Harris has nothing to be ashamed of. He did well in his 7 years as Prime Minister. He did exceptionally well. He got rid of our debt, our public debt. Remember, we were one of the highest detonations in the world. He eradicated crime. We were then the murder capital of the world. And he managed COVID. And many a country would love to use his template. So Harris has nothing to be ashamed of, because even his adversaries considered him an astute politician.
At the point at which he fired his colleagues and dissolved the parliament, I think that was a very astute political move. I admired it, and I thought at the time he was going to be problematic for us. He then immediately followed up about 3-4 days later with a very, very attractive package of measures which address all sectors of the country, and particularly you would recall that this in the throes of COVID and with the closing of the winter season, there was some emergent hardships in the country. There were persons who were beginning to be laid off. You had escalating fuel prices. You have the whole question of the global food supply. You have the issues of many of the migrants who were persons who had come to St. Kitts and who were not finding employment. And his policies, as enunciated within 84 hours of the dissolution of Parliament, I felt hit the nail on the head. So at that point, I felt he was threatening, because he was doing the right things. He was showing that he had the strength of character, the will, the courage to do a few things. And I felt at that time he was a particular threat to us, especially if he had gone presidential. Because if you are doing the right things as the leader, then my view, strategically at that time, if I had an opportunity to whisper into his ear, I would have told him to go presidential and not to seek to delay the process by perfecting a team.
Yes. Don't feel bad, former Prime Minister. You perhaps had the wrong advisors. If Hartley could have whispered in your ears, as he said, he would have advised you to go presidential instead of waiting 75 years to perfect the team. But just like change is unavoidable, so too, Timothy Harris, no man is infallible. To err is human. And you have made some fundamental errors. I'm sure you would agree.
Assembled and be ready seriously for an election within 60 days. So I felt that he made a fundamental error in terms of dragging the process out. I think having given, quote unquote, all of his goodies up front, the next 75 or so days, the average person knew that the economy was not in the strongest shape. You're not seeing any tourist visitors arriving. St. Kitts and Nevis still have some of the most punitive measures in terms of COVID, whereby you still have, at that time it was still tests required. You still have to get permission from the Ministry of Health to enter the country. Just hanging around to ready your team, I think, was a fundamental error, because we knew that PLP had captured the imagination of the public. But I think with the passage of time, that too passed, and we were able then to sustain the lead that we had and hold on to it.
A fundamental error, allowing the Labour Party to sustain their lead and move into government. But that, my friends, is now history. The people have spoken. And they have said, in no uncertain terms, that they are not going back to any coalition. They are not going back to any alliance. They have decided what they wanted.
Is that persons were not minded to go the route of a coalition, of an alliance, of groupings again, because their experience from this last one were not the best. And obviously, if a team unity or a unity government fails, then what else can work? Because the very essence of the collaboration of those three parties were that they could have unified and brought some stability to the country.
Well, my Straight Dog family, the experience, as we analyze and continue to analyze the election of 10 days ago, is a clear confirmation that change is unavoidable. That's my story for tonight, and I am not going to change it But I want to thank Almighty God for guiding our conversation tonight as always. I want to thank you, the many listeners on social media, Facebook and YouTube. We will do something about that radio feed as soon as possible. I commit to you. Those who sent emails, I thank you as well. And just remember, wherever you are, on whatever platform you listen, you are the ones who make Straight Talk. And I say a big, big thank you. Spread the word. Share the links for those who have missed it tonight. I want to remind you as well that whatever your mind conceive, that you will achieve. But first of all, you've got to believe. So when you wake in the morning, thank God for the morning light. Thank Him for taking you through the night. And my Straight Talk family, keep moving on. Bye-bye until we connect on Thursday for another edition of Straight Talk. Be good to yourselves and all whom you meet. And be good to everyone. Bye-bye. Straight Talk family, keep moving on.
The morning, I thank God for the morning light, giving thanks and praises for taking me safely through the night, for the rest of food and loving care, and for my mother's breath of life that's got me here. So whatever my mind conceives, that I will achieve, you better believe. I do the things I should, be to my brethren